Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Past the Wire's Kentucky Derby Radar, Episode 3. I am with Jeff Metz, Jim Gazzelli. We are full Derby prep mode. The Rebel is behind us. This weekend we got the San Felipe. We've got the Fountain of Youth. We've got the Gotham. There's another little stake, I want to say, in Maryland or something for 3-year-olds as well. That's not really making the radar, but it is a 3-year-old stake. We're rolling. It's starting to. We got Forte, Blazing Sevens coming back. Off runs in the Breeders' Cup. Forte is, I guess, the benchmark for everybody else. But tough to argue that we're not in full Derby countdown at this point. What do you say, gentlemen?
I agree with you. This weekend I think is going to be a real big weekend because, last weekend we had a big focus on the Rebel. It was one of the main races. This week we got 3 big 3-year-old races with the 3 that you just stated. And I think we're going to see where they're sitting with maybe one more race prior to the Derby. So we're going to see how things kind of separate themselves as they did in the Rebel.
Yeah, the interesting part to me in New York, it's funny. We'll probably have the largest field on dirt in all of 2023 of a full field of 14 in the Gotham, which is pretty cool for this weekend. I'm sure we'll all be banging the drum for some bigger fields once the graded company starts to roll into Saratoga, and we're staring at 5 and 6 horse fields. So let's enjoy it while it lasts. And I think the big thing out of Florida is really how is Forte going to run. He's the proverbial leader in the clubhouse, so to speak, right now. But I think a lot of the thoughts and opinions on him moving forward hinge a lot on what we see out of him this weekend. So plenty of good stuff, plenty of good stakes action all over the country, and excited to talk to the both of you about it here.
For what it's worth, and I don't know that we'd hear anything different, but for what it's worth, the way Forte is reportedly training in Florida is absolutely superb. I watched on video him schooling in the paddock, and he does really look the part. He'd win a lot of beauty contests out there, that's for sure. We know it's not a beauty contest. But, I've always got questions until they come back and run the first time as a 3-year-old. Did they progress? Were they just ahead of the class last year? Did somebody progress more than them? So there are always a lot of questions. And, we touched base on one of the other shows. I don't remember if it was Derby Radar 1 or 2, that historically, for whatever reason, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile has not been a super producer of Kentucky Derby winners for whatever reason. So does that work against Forte? I don't know. I don't know, but I'm excited to see him run. I'm planning on going on Saturday to see him in the flesh myself, along with what looks to be a very nice field and a fantastic card. What was your both take on the Rebel?
Number 1 is Mo Donegal by Uncle Mo. And they're off in the Remsen. as they come on for the finish, and it's going to be tight here in the Remsen. Mo Donegal. Mo Donegal bearing down on the outside. It's Mo Donegal and early voting, and it is Mo Donegal to win the Wood Memorial. And it will be Mo Donegal to win the Test of the Champion, the Belmont Stakes.
Well, always, I've stated this many times. I'm a kind of an underdog Cinderella story kind of guy, and not that the horse didn't figure, but I don't think any of us picked him to win the Rebel, Keith Desormeau's horse. And so, James Graham, he shows up when you least expect it, and the horse ran really good. Now, was it the slop, or was he coming into his own? That's a good question, but I was surprised that a couple of the other ones, especially Verifying, I was surprised that a couple of those didn't run better than I had thought. But I thought Reincarnate ran a really good race. So, what was your take, John?
Well, I liked Gun Pilot and Reincarnate going into the race. Okay, and I like both of them coming out of the race more than I did before the race, even though neither one won. I think Reincarnate, in my opinion, didn't show his customary speed, was much further off the pace than he normally is, was taking a lot of wet dirt, came back full of mud, didn't look to me like he was getting a hold of the track at all until very late in the race. And then in the stretch, he kindly found himself, kind of adjusted to the track, said, hey, I'm going to have to deal with this. And I think he was finishing best of anybody in that race. And had they gone around again, he probably would have been the winner. And if he handled the track better earlier on, I think for sure he would have been the winner. Or if he showed his, customary speed and laid close to the pace, he'd have probably been the winner. So I was very impressed with his race coming out of it, because I think nothing really went his way. Gun Pilot as well. If you watched him run or watched the replay, he didn't get out well at all and was behind a lot of horses. And every time Ricardo Santana tried to get him into the game, somebody got in front of him. Hold closed. Stop. Wasn't really checking bad, just was about to go, and then just had to grab him and lose his momentum. And was going to go grab him, lose his momentum. 3-4 times he actually just totally had to put the brakes on a horse. Young horse going around 2 turns, constantly putting the brakes on when you're asking him to go under those kind of conditions. Never really got a chance to run. Looked to my eye or my eyes that he did have some run in him, and that he could have run a lot better had he had a different kind of trip. And maybe the rain didn't help him, and the wet sloppy track didn't help him either. But I thought both of the horses that I liked, Reincarnate and Gun Pilot, both benefited and will benefit from that race and be tougher going forward. Enough to call them legit Derby contenders, I don't know. It depends what all these other horses do and how much further they have to go. But I would say they'll both run much better than they ran in the Rebel next time out. And I wouldn't say that about anybody else coming out of the race. I think, Confidence Game, we may have saw his best shot fired last Saturday. I don't know that he's the type that's going to go forward and continue to progress and improve. Verifying and the other horses that were, kind of buzz horses and shorter prices in there, I didn't like going in. I don't like coming out. The horse that Jim liked, I really didn't see an excuse for, unless maybe he didn't like the track. That's something that we'll find out as we go forward.
Yeah, I think Giant Mischief had a little bit of trouble going into that first turn, and with a young horse, and that was a fuller field than you're going to find early on. Getting into some traffic trouble around that first turn, I think is pretty detrimental. It kind of probably makes the horse cower a little bit. so early on in a race, and it's tough to come back from. I think the sloppy track will be interesting as we get closer to Derby Day, right? I think if the track comes up dry and fast on Derby Day, we'll know the weather report a handful of days beforehand, and people will automatically draw a line through the Rebel one way or the other, right? If it's going to be sloppy on Derby Day, this might turn into a key race. I think for the most part, aside from there being a reasonable upset in the finish, I think the handicappers got it right that it was going to be pretty fast early on and set it up for a closer. The horse that I like, Giant Mischief, what do we see from him moving forward? Who knows? I was alive to the cross country pick 5 with Red Route 1, and at about the 8th pole, I started counting my dollars, and by the time the wire came, I was like on the living room floor, sobbing a little bit because I thought I was home free. But that's racing, and I think it'll be an interesting race moving forward, depending on what the weather is come Derby Day. We'll look back on it, and maybe it'll carry a little bit more weight, or it might not. But I think certainly to your point, John, I think there are some contenders coming out of that we'll be interested to see running back as we move forward.
And I think that's something that we touched on, that, adversity, traffic troubles, kickback. I think we had touched on that a couple of times, that, this is a big test that these young 3-year-olds are going to have to navigate. 2 turns, speed going into the first turn. Like we said, all the different variables that could come up in a race, adversities that they have to overcome. So, definitely it'll be exciting this weekend. And, we're going to have some more horses to talk about and see who we like.
Jeff, I'd like to ask you a question about, from a training perspective. It's always been said for a long time that, the Arkansas Derby, because of the timing of the race and because the dirt track at Arkansas is very similar to the dirt track at Churchill Downs, that it's been a very productive Derby race and Derby path, the Oaklawn path. How much weight do you put in that as a trainer? And my next question, and kind of leads into, they kind of feed off each other, is, are all sloppy tracks created equal? In other words, a horse like Confidence Game, who liked the slop at Oaklawn, is it an automatic that he's going to like slop at Churchill if he gets it there, and vice versa? A horse like, in my opinion, Reincarnate, that wasn't handling it and didn't like it, is there a chance that that's just the Oaklawn slop that he didn't like, and it comes up sloppy at Churchill Downs and he revels in it? So are all sloppy tracks created equal? And is there some truth in that from your perspective as a trainer and a horseman, that the Oaklawn strip is very similar in makeup to the Churchill strip, and that's why the Arkansas path has been so productive in producing Kentucky Derby winners?
Well, I can answer the mud tracks. So sometimes they seal them and pack them down, and they are trying to prevent them getting wet and sloppy. So obviously you see sloppy, muddy, wet fast, and you see good. But so some are really fast, and when you see like a wet fast track, that's often it's a very tight surface, and it's even tighter than a regular day when it's listed as fast. And sometimes when you'll see these hard packed tracks, speed really holds because the horses don't get tired, their hooves don't go into the dirt quite as far, and they just skip over the top. And some really like it, as opposed to when it's sloppy, it could be, instead of that wet fast about a half inch or an inch deep, all of a sudden a sloppy track becomes about 3 inches deep, and they're really struggling to get over it. And what happens is some horses have a good cup to their feet, and they can just really dig in and pull and dig in and push. But what happens is sometimes they're slipping, And especially like we say, these young horses, that's another thing. Some of them, it was their first time running in the mud. And so they're getting accustomed to it. It's kind of like if you've ever seen a young horse run on the grass for the first time and it's never had any workouts on the grass. You know, they kind of, it takes about half of the race to kind of get their feet under them and get their bearings. And I think the same thing happens with muddy tracks. It's always easier when you have an older horse, like a 5 or 6 year old gelding. He's run 8 times in the mud or on a wet track, and he's had 2 wins, 2 seconds, 2/3. So there's a lot more racing form and history to go off of. But when it's only the first time on mud, or they've only had 1 race in the mud, and we're looking at this tight span, like we're looking at, you know, here we are in March and we're going to be running in May. So you only got about 60 days to where you have to figure out if they like that muddy track, or if they just like one dirt track to another. And to go on your second point, is Arkansas very similar? They are very similar in the fact that they're a little bit deeper dirt, maybe deeper than on a West Coast. And, you know, you got that clay, natural dirt of Hot Springs. You have more of a sandy type track over there in Gulfstream, probably New York as well because of the weather. Oaklawn gets a lot of weather, so they have to, you know, they just run in the slop because they actually can't put chemicals in the track because they're next to hot springs, literally hot springs, and they can't put chemicals in the track. So it gets much sloppier than, say, another track would. So
I never knew that. That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah. So sometimes on the morning training, they have to wait until it thaws out because they can't put chemicals to just let the ice melt or the snow or the rain or whatever. Because actually, anytime it's 32 degrees or below, the water that's in the track is actually frozen. So as the horses are going over to trot or canter or gallop, you hear this crunch, 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 crunch. And it sounds like they're going in snow. But what happens is, if they were able to put some little chemicals in there, then they could harrow that through and kind of warm it up and get it a lot better. But oftentimes in Oaklawn, they'll go later. Instead of the early morning training, like 5:30 in the morning, they might not get out on the track till 9, 10, or 11 a.m. till it warms up and Mother Nature warms it up.
Interesting. You know, I lived in Hot Springs a couple of years. I actually went there and wound up staying a couple of years. And I did notice something that I found odd. A lot of days when it was cold in the morning, the track, I would find out the track was closed for training because it was frozen. And I'm like, well, it's cold, but it's not that cold. I mean, I've seen them train, and it's probably something to do with that not being able to put chemicals down because, people are swimming in the hot springs and bathing in the hot springs and drinking the water and whatnot. So interesting. I never knew that. Jim, what race are we starting with this week?
Let's start on the West Coast. Let's go to Santa Anita and let's dive into the San Felipe.
Let me preface this by kind of giving you guys, some of you might have seen it in the news, but in Los Angeles, we're not used to rain and snow and hail. I mean, this is like unprecedented weather, and you might have seen headlines. All of a sudden, the Hollywood sign has snow all over it. So
I did see that.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind as we talk about this is the track has been closed a couple days. It's been only available for jogging a couple of days. You'll notice no workouts over the last 6 or 7 days at Santa Anita because they're trying to save the track. They're trying to preserve the surface for this weekend's races. But that also means some of these horses missed their key workout leading into the San Vicente. So and in the big cap. So anyways, it's a great card on Saturday, but just a little footnote to let you guys know.
That's very interesting from a handicapping perspective. So I would take that and advise all the bettors playing that card to look at the horse's last workout, see when it was, see if they, pattern wise and spacing wise did miss a workout. And then I would gravitate towards trainers that I know have a lot of bottom in their horses. So if they did miss a workout, it's not, the end all be all because they're an outfit that puts a lot of bottom into their horses. But I look at the San Felipe, and now that you said that, one thing that jumps out, which would give me cause for pause, is Go Rocket Ride is a horse that ran one time for Richard Mandela and won. As great a trainer as Mandela is, he's not really known for cranking them up first time out and winning first time out. And, this horse won easily under Pratt first time out, and now runs back. If a horse like that, and stretching out into a stake is also an aggressive move for Mandela. He's more of a conservative type of guy, even with good horses. So this horse missing a work, that would give me cause for pause, even with the respect I have for Mandela and him doing something that, shows he must really like this horse. You never want to be in a situation where you missed a work or something like that. When you're asking as much as you are of a horse like Go Rocket Ride, because I think it's a big ask to go from a maiden first time out and then stretch out in a field like this.
Yeah, where would Jeff, or John, either one of you would probably be wise to this? So Go Rocket Ride, his last work was on the 23rd. Where would that other workout be? Or do you think they knew the weather was coming in and maybe they pushed this workout up a little bit from where they would normally do it? Seems like he's going every 7 days. Would they typically work 3-4 days out from a race in that final breeze? Is that pretty standard?
I would say that most trainers would probably breeze anywhere from 5 to 7 days, probably typically 7 days out from a big race. Every once in a while, you'll see Mandela put a 7/8 work into him, and then he'll come back with about 3 days before the race with a real solid 3/8. And that's kind of a pattern for him. Baffert,
he might have missed that 3/8 work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Baffert, we know, puts those. Well, no, they're not Baffert's horses, but John alluded to that. When you see that 111, 6 furlongs, about a week out, it's
ready.
Go time.
Yeah,
it's go time.
Right. They're not going to get tired when they turn for home when you see that work. That's it. And I mean, they may not win, but they're ready.
So those are, typically nowadays horses work about 7 days out from a race. I would say if we go back 10 or 15 years, they used to work about 5 days out from a race, but things have changed a little bit over the years. And some of these better horses that they're pretty much, once they're hitting the stakes, we know the stakes are always run on Saturdays and Sundays, 95% of the time. So they may be working. And those are busy days. If you look at the work tab, those are busy days. Saturdays and Sundays, a lot of workers. You'll see a 5/8 and 110 horses are going 5/8 of a mile on that Saturday or Sunday. So a lot of workers on the weekends. And then they just stay in that every weekend pattern, like every 7 days, half mile, 5/8, 6 furlongs, 7 furlongs, whatever it may be. Every trainer has their own way to do it. Some like to put a nice big fitness one of 6 or 7 furlongs in, and others like to maybe go 3/8 or a half and put that sharp speed in. And then every once in a while, depending on the race, but you might see a gate work blowout from the gate just to put that extra zip in them if they want to be taking blinkers off, putting blinkers on, whatever that may be. But at this stage of the game, some of these horses are lightly raced. Like John said, Mandela's colt is only one start, and now boom, he's on the trail now.
Does anybody in this race or have an opinion on who they think might win? I have a couple of opinions on the race, but I'll be the first to readily admit I don't know who's going to win it. I don't think I know.
I'm gonna go with Practical Move. I think I mentioned that. He was one that I kind of liked leading into it. He won the race at Los Alamitos, and then I was told that he got a little break, and then this is his first race back off of that break since Los Alamitos. He seems to look good, fit well in there. And National Treasure is another horse that I'm going to lean towards. So those are two of my plays that I like in the race.
It's very, very interesting, and racing has a funny way of writing these kind of stories and irony. Tim Yakteen last year got some of the Bob Baffert horses, and he was supposedly to have a strong hand for the Derby. This year, everybody thinks Bob has even a stronger hand for the Derby. Yakteen gets a bunch of horses. How ironic would it be if Tim wins the Derby with a horse that he had that he didn't get from Bob. I mean, you know,
That's what happened in the Los Al race. I mean, it was
Right.
Bob was low odds. I think he ran second and third, and in a short 5 or 6 horse field, Practical Move won the race. So it was kind of funny to get beat by the protege, you know?
yeah, and you know, when you look at Practical Move, you know, he's got a good resume. He really does. You know, he's improving. You know, I doubt he would be that much of a surprise. National Treasure was a horse I liked a lot coming out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I thought he was really coming around. I thought he would win the Sham. He didn't. Reincarnate did. I think Reincarnate, even though he ran, to some people's opinion, bad in the Rebel, it was actually a good showing for him. So it makes me a little bit more reluctant to just, you know, toss National Treasure, but he was a disappointment to me. I think he should have run better last time. You know, I don't know who's going to win this race, but I'm very intrigued to see how 3 horses run. Okay. Hejazi is one of them. Only because all the hype that surrounded this horse, and you know, when they pay that kind of money for a horse, he's going to have a lot of hype. Did he finally come around last time? Was it the Lasix? Was it the cutback? You know, I don't know, but I'm curious to see if he comes out and stamps himself as a serious top 3-year-old, which I think he's got to run first or second in order to do that. Very curious to see what Go Rocket Ride does coming out of that one maiden. We've got a similar situation we'll touch on in the Fountain of Youth with Mays a little later, but very curious because Mandela to me is going a little out of pattern in a way where if we were playing poker, I'd say that's a tell that he really thinks this horse is up to it, because he's a little bit conservative. And, you know, when I see a 112 work from Mandela and, you know, a couple of weeks before that, a 113 work from Mandela, I'm like, yeah. And then he goes from the maiden into the stake, wins first time out. Pratt rode him, Pratt Stakes. You know, Pratt has options in all these races. I'm curious. And then there's a horse that will probably be one of the most lightly regarded of the Baffert transfers, but I'm very intrigued by Mr. Fisk on the outside. I don't expect him to win from out there because I think it's a big ask, and I don't know that he's going to get the trip, and I don't know that he's as far along as some of these others, but he's the kind of horse that we spoke about on the first show, Jeff, when you had asked me, you know, what do I look for? And I said, you know, not what everybody else looks for, not who's running great now, but who's going to be running great on the first Saturday in May. And this is a horse to me that looks like he's progressing. He's going to like distance as they get longer. I think he'll like 1 1/8 more than he'll like the 1 16th. I think that he'll like the 1 1/4 more than the 1 1/8. And once they get to the Belmont, even though it's at Aqueduct this year, it's probably around 4 turns. I don't even know how they're going to run it, but whatever they do, I think he'll ultimately like the 1 1/2 even more. He's by Arrogate, who's turning out to be a good sire. Out of a German mare, and those German horses, I don't care who they are, they're all bred to run 3, 4, 5 miles. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, classic distance, 1.5 miles.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So they're all bred that way, and they're bred for turf. And this one's running on dirt, and I love the steady progression. You know, he just looks like somebody that's going to continue to grind and get better as he goes. So those are the 3 I have my eye on. But I can't say that any of them are, you know, quote, who I would bet to win on Saturday. You know what I'm saying? Because really, when I handicapped this race, there were just so many question marks. If I was betting this race in like a pick 4 or a pick 5, it's either a race that if I could convince myself that Go Rocket Ride is the second coming, I might go to him and take a wild stab, but he's not really my style of horse to do that with. I think most of those type wind up getting beat the first time they get thrown to the wolves. So I would have to spread in a race like this and just find my signal somewhere else.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Jim, what are your thoughts on the rail horse? That's the horse that comes out of the El Camino Real Derby at Golden Gate.
Yeah, I was looking at a couple of different horses here, and this Chase the Chaos is intriguing. It certainly has improving figures, 6 career starts, never worse than third. Looks like he's been running quite well lately. I don't know much about Golden Gate and how horses come from there.
It's kind of like when we get into Gulfstream and Aqueduct. There's a few horses that are coming from smaller tracks up to the big tracks, and I have your same feeling as you. For me, I think they have to prove themselves on the bigger circuit, and not that they don't deserve their chance, because they've proven themselves where they're at. But I think when they come up to that next level, that's when it gets real exciting for them to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean the distance won't be a challenge, right? Won last time at a mile and an eighth, so I think he's got that going for him. Some of the Yak-Teen horses are intriguing to me. I think perhaps Hejazi just needed to get into the winner's circle for a confidence boost. Kind of like what we were talking about last week, where, maybe you shorten a horse up just so they can get a victory, and it, maybe rearranges their mindset a little bit so that they can move forward. Perhaps we'll see that with Hejazi. It wouldn't be all that surprising with a $3.5 million horse. There's just a lot of interesting things in this race. Like, for example, Genius Jimmy. I like the name, obviously, but I think figures wise, probably doesn't fit coming off the turf. Like it's an interesting spot to put this horse in. So I won't have any money on him, but it'll be interesting to see how he runs. One other horse that kind of stuck out to me, again, searching for perhaps a little bit of a confidence boost, is this 10 Skinner for John Sheriffs. I mean, it ran a huge figure last time. And that's, like what you've said, John, you want to see them improve from 2 to 3. And he was off for, 3-4 months and popped a huge figure. So perhaps this horse is kind of coming into his own. We'll see. But, if I had to give you a pick right now, I think all the Yak-Teen horses will probably take a fair amount of money. So I would probably be backing this 10 Skinner to see if he could follow up that maiden effort last time and win at a decent price here.
He's a curlin, and we love those curlins. They're all running. Interesting about the other two horses that you mentioned. Genius Jimmy is coming. He did run once on the dirt, but that was way back when, and I think we can kind of give him a pass for that. But he's coming off 3 turf races, going back onto the dirt. And the horse that you mentioned on the rail, all his starts have been on. Well, no, his first start, I guess, at Canterbury is on the dirt. Off the turf there is on the dirt, but he's coming off, a bunch of races over the synthetic at Golden Gate, and on the turf before that. The thing I will say about him is, he's won 2 in a row. He's got a lot of bottom to him. He's had a lot of starts in comparison with some of these horses. And, coming from Golden Gate with all those starts, he's one that won't be hurt or probably didn't miss a work, if that's a factor at all. He's probably as fit as he could be, if some of the others might not be because of that.
And the other thing from a training standpoint is that synthetic track gets horses very fit because they use different muscles to get through that track. And so a horse coming from synthetic to dirt has a much better advantage than a dirt horse going to synthetic for the first time. So,
That's
that horse will be
interesting.
fit.
Also-
And like you said, he's already proven that that he can get the mile and an eighth. And the one thing about synthetic also is that this horse might encounter coming from turf and synthetic races. The synthetic track doesn't kick back, so they don't get dirt in their face. So it sprays very lightly, but basically it plays like a turf race. There's none of the very hard kickback in the face, and they don't come back all muddy and covered. So that's one less thing to put in the equation. A horse is coming from, or for him, he's going to have to go back to the dirt, and if he's not in the clear, could be getting some kickback, and we'll see how he deals with the kickback and the dirt track, getting back on the dirt against quality horses.
Yeah, all the workouts too have been at Golden Gate. So are we just kind of, you got to handicap the race assuming he'll take well to the dirt, right? Otherwise, he's just a complete toss because all of his body of work has been over a synthetic track or a sloppy track in his first start last August. So right, like we can't hold that against him at this point. If the figures have been improving, the distance won't be a challenge, and he's always in the money. So I think we got to treat that as our money's worth, assuming he's going to be fine on the dirt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this race is exactly what John said. I mean, it's almost like whoever wins, you're not going to be real surprised. It's anybody's race.
I agree, 100%.
That moves us over to the Fountain of Youth, if you don't mind talking about that one, Jim. The Fountain of Youth, it looks like a one-horse race.
Yeah, right. It's like we said in the intro. We're all going to be watching to see how Forte runs. It's his race to win based on his body of work. But like we see every single year, horses around this time of year on the Derby Trail, they step up, they make a good progression forward and insert themselves into the mix. I think from a handicapping standpoint, a wagering standpoint, I don't know how you can realistically play Forte, by himself. There's really no value to be had there, I imagine. But what do you think, John? What's your interpretation of the race so far?
Well, it's an interesting race, and I definitely don't see it as a one horse race. I could see why a lot of people do, and Forte, leader of the class, no question about it. Dominated the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, really seemed to come into his own. Cave Rock was highly respected at that point, highly regarded. He ran past him without much difficulty at all. Gulfstream is a very speed-friendly racetrack. Let's keep that in mind, okay? There's a couple of horses in here that, in my opinion, are very eligible to step up. General Jim on the rail has been on my radar for a while. I didn't like the trip he got in the Mucho Macho Man. I thought he was the best horse that day. I was extremely surprised that they ran him back in the Swale as opposed to the Holy Bull, which was run on that same day. And it was a head scratcher to me because I thought, well, what is Shug doing? Well, he knew what he was doing because he was able to win the Swale. And now he stretches him back out. And I think he's extremely dangerous. I think he would have won the Mucho Macho Man. Shug is the kind of trainer that lets the horses bring him to the races as opposed to him bringing them to the races. So he thinks this horse belongs. This horse has a lot of bottom to him. He's got recency to him that Forte doesn't have. He's got Luis Saez sitting a nice rail trip. And if Forte hasn't gone forward or isn't at his best, I could see a horse like this, at the least giving him a tussle. Now, I will also say this, Blazing Sevens was handled pretty easily by Forte in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. But, you know, before that, he showed some signs of talent. Chad Brown would not have had him in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile if he didn't think he belonged there, and he certainly wouldn't have him here if he didn't think that he was this type of horse, despite getting beat by Forte. He knew Forte was going to be in this race. That's no surprise. He's not ducking him. That tells me that this horse might have gone forward enough where he thinks, hey, I might have caught up to him. You know, my question, and I don't know the answer, my question would be, did he offer Pratt the call, and did Pratt stick with Mandela's 1-for-1 horse in Santa Anita? Or, you know, did something else happen where, you know, he wound up going to Rosario? But Rosario is an excellent substitute. He's a very strong finisher. This horse seems to be a finishing type. And I don't think the difference between him and Forte is as big as the Breeders' Cup Juvenile would suggest it is. I think they're probably a lot closer in ability and raw talent at this point than that race would suggest. You know, Mage is another one that kind of reminds me of the Mandela horse. He's coming in off one very, very fast start. I was there that day. That field did look like it had some talented maidens in there. This horse was pretty overlooked. And there were the kind of horses in there where you could understand why he was overlooked. But he outran them all, went wire to wire. The track was honest. And, you know, I looked back at this Gustavo Delgado just to see, and he hasn't really won any of these big races, but he's hit the board with horses like this at ridiculous prices. You know, 3 or 4 times that I was able to find at like 50, 60, 70 to 1. He's second, third. So he's obviously got a good gauge of, you know, where he could, you know, step up. And if I see a guy running horses like this and hitting the board at like 50, 60, 70 to 1, that tells me that eventually he's liable to win one of them. You know what I'm saying? And surprise everybody. So this horse won't be as long as some of his others because he's getting a lot of buzz. But, you know, he would have to be really talented to win. I don't really see anybody else that I think is capable of stepping up and doing any damage here. And that includes the winner of the Holy Bull Rocket Can. They ran a race on the card much faster than his that same day. I think these are a little better than what he beat that day. And I think he's vulnerable. So, you know, the winner probably comes out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, unless Shug's horse is really good. As intriguing as Mage is, I think it's a big ask, and I think one of those 3 will be good enough to run him down, even if he is really good and gets the jump on him. You know, unless the track was just a ridiculously speed biased track. You know, one of those big 3, I think, is going to nail him. The question becomes which one. And we'll find out. You know, I mean, none of those 3 would surprise me. I mean, you know, whether it was Forte, Blazing Sevens, or General Jim on the rail, you know, none would. I wouldn't walk away, you know, surprised at any one of those 3 being the one that's finishing fastest and gets up.
Yeah, I as I mentioned, I thought Forte really held a strong hand here. I was pretty much just handicapping for second. And the ones I came up with were General Jim, Blazing Sevens, and Rocket Can. Those were the 3 that I liked underneath Forte for a lot of the reasons you spoke. And I know you don't really like Rocket Can, but I think Mott's horses just get better with every race. And the way he did it, even though the time might have been a little slower. So, you know, I'm just hoping that race moves him forward. But I'm like you. I think Blazing Sevens is not ducking Forte for a reason and saying, you know what, I want to test my horse and see, because you can't duck him on the first Saturday in May. So you might as well see how you stack up.
No, I agree. And it's, the horse has shown some ability here and there. You know what I mean? He really has. He's got a nice turn of foot when he's right. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. It's
always just to go on the trainer side of things. So Todd Pletcher's won plenty of dirt races. He wins dirt and turf, but I think it's for Chad Brown, whenever you have like known as a turf trainer, right? So you're known as a turf trainer. So whenever you're trying to win a classic like the Kentucky Derby, you're always kind of chasing these, and you just always have that, oh, he's a better trainer for turf, Yeah,
but with Chad, I think that's a complete misstatement. He's got, if you look at his resume on dirt, it's a Hall of Fame resume. I mean, he's won 2 Preaknesses, he's won a couple of Breeders' Cups on dirt. He's been second in a lot of big races. He's got a Hall of Fame resume on dirt, and he's a turf trainer. So that just tells me he's
I think the
trainer.
thing is, just like Baffert's barn's loaded with 3-year-olds this time of year, Chad's Brown is loaded with turf horses all the time. And I think you see races where he runs 1, 2, 3 in a turf race, and that's why,
he's definitely got
perception.
that reputation for sure. I mean, he's known as a turf trainer, but he's not. He's just a great trainer, and he's got a barn full of great horses, both surfaces. He really does. And I've said it before. I think that the way he brings horses to the classics, the Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, are as good as anybody in the game. And he might not win as many as Baffert, obviously, but I don't think he's got the stock. But if you look at Cloud Computing, the Preakness winner, I don't think Cloud Computing was the best horse, the best 3-year-old that year, but I think he was brought to that race to peak, skipped the Derby, and peaked on that Preakness day and won his classic. I think he did the same thing last year with Early Voting. Voting wasn't the best 3-year-old. He skipped the Derby because he knew it was the right move to get him to peak for the Preakness, and bang, he won the Preakness. So he knows how to bring horses. Zandon ran a huge race in the Derby. He just wasn't good enough to win, but he was brought to the Derby perfectly and in the right spot to win, just couldn't close the deal. He couldn't outfinish Epicenter, which we learned during the course of the year that Epicenter was probably a better 3-year-old, and Rich Strike just got that dream trip. But at the 16th pole, Zandon was right in the fight. So Chad, when it comes to these dirt classics, really brings them along as good as anybody in the game.
Yeah, that's a good point on early voting, right? I think, all the pressure was on that horse to win the Preakness. He was pointed there, and that was the goal coming out of the wood. I know Chad kind of dragged his feet in making a decision, but we're all kind of reading between the lines and kind of grasped what he was doing with early voting. And I had a nice win bet on early voting in the Preakness because that was the ultimate goal. He was fresh, and you knew Chad was going to have him peaking for that race, which I think we do see, kind of like to your both of your points earlier, like Blazing Sevens could have stayed in New York and run in the Gotham this week, which we'll talk about here in the next few minutes, where he probably would have went off as the favorite in that race, I would imagine.
Right.
But he's here, and he's going to go up against the toughest competition of the weekend. That Mage horse, I was on him in that maiden race a few weeks back. He got hammered in the Kentucky Derby future pool. I think he went from 80-1 when the pool opened and closed somewhere around like 60 or 65, which if you're reading into the betting markets, that might be a good sign. But perhaps this, like you were mentioning earlier, John, maybe this is a horse that finishes second or third at a big price here and uses this as a springboard into the Florida Derby to kind of key in on getting into the Kentucky Derby. One other interesting thing about Rocket Can, typically they say when you pair a buyer speed figure, you're kind of sitting on another forward move. So he's got, 282 figures the last 2 times out. However, one was in his 2-year-old season, and then, he paired that top in his first start as a 3-year-old. Does that kind of, what's the best word, like maybe diminish that pairing of the top figures because it was 2 to 3 and you want to see a forward move in that first start in your 3-year-old year? Or does that not really matter and you just kind of look at, okay, he paired 2 top figures and you think he's probably sitting on another forward move here? Where do you fall in your handicapping, John?
Well, I look at 2 things, okay, and I view it as a negative to get right to the point. Yeah. I think a good 3-year-old always runs faster than his best 2-year-old race in his 3-year-old debut. Okay. The next thing I look at, and I'm not really a buyer guy, I would more look at thoroughbreds, but we're looking at buyers now because we've got the formulator open. First time out at Saratoga, he runs a 67. Okay. Next time out, he runs a 54. So second out, it's the only pattern we've got where he's second off a layoff and he regressed. He comes back in the Holy Bull. He wins. He runs an 84. Now we're going to see him come back second off the layoff again for the second time. If he repeats that pattern that he did first time, then it looks like he regresses off the 84 and goes back to an 80, maybe a 78, which is not going to be good enough or fast enough to win this race. And I look a lot more at the pattern than the number itself and the form cycle and the trend. So to me, I see indications of a horse that might regress as opposed to go forward. So I would view that as a negative. And especially when I look at the fact that he didn't, on the buyer scale, run faster than he did at 2, at 3 in the 3-year-old bow. I like to see that. I definitely want to get both of your take, though, before we move on Cyclone Mischief, who was 6-5 in the Holy Bull, didn't run a step. Comes back in the Fountain of Youth at 12-1 on the morning line, might be twice that by the time they go to the gate. And what's the take on him for you guys?
I'll I'll fade Dale Romans until the cows come home.
Okay.
I think like you mentioned, I think the number is going to be even higher because Forte is going to take so much money that everybody else is going to be higher odds than what they normally would be. But I think that I think there's other horses in here that are going to run better. So I think he's going to have to really step it up to kind of get back on the beam and become a contender, as we like to say. So he's got to prove it. In my opinion, he's got to prove it.
Nobody worried about that 6-5 against these, what was supposed to be these type of horses in the Holy Bull. Interesting. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, if you look at the races that he's won, you really haven't seen many of these horses come back to do much of anything. And then, in the Kentucky Jockey Cup, you lost to Instant Coffee and Curly Jack. I think when he's faced tougher competition, he's it doesn't look like he's been up to the task. So, that short of odds in the Holy Bull was a bit surprising.
I agree. I didn't like him there. I don't like him here, but I do find this scenario interesting. And
You know this business, John. It's what have you done for me lately?
yeah, no, it's the truth. And that's the story with Dale. Everybody knocks Dale and he seems to have just gone ice cold. But a couple of years ago, not that many years ago, he was on fire, winning races all over the place, winning stake races with not that many starters, Arlington Millions, this, that, everything. And then he just shut off like a light switch. And I don't know why, but and it seemed like he was still getting the same type of horses from the same owners. So I don't really know what happened in his career that really made it really tail. But like Jim said, a lot of people fade him now, and he very rarely will jump up and beat you like he used to. There used to be a time where you threw him out and it was at your own peril because he was jumping up and winning at all these ridiculous prices. I think he beat me out of a huge pick 5 in the Breeders' Cup with that Court Vision horse or whatever the heck his name was. When I had Toralore and Courageous Cat for I can't even remember how much money, but those days are gone. He just doesn't seem to do that anymore.
Yeah. Nick Zito won his first race a couple of weeks ago for the first time in seemingly forever. So anything's possible.
All right, now Nick's another guy. Used to be in the Derby every year with inexpensive horses when people were paying millions and couldn't get there. And every year he would come up with a contender. And now, like you said, he's like 1 for 72,
Yeah.
This one funny thing about this business is like it's just crazy the way it goes. It's like you can be on top of the world, one decade, and then on the next decade you barely have enough horses to fill the barn. So yeah,
tough game, this horse racing, no question.
All right, let's move to Aqueduct and the Gotham. Some interesting horses in here. I feel like it's certainly a competitive field that we're looking at. I think there's 2 former Baffert horses in there that were sent east, which is interesting to me. One notable omission here is Arctic Arrogance, who apparently I was reading today that there's a little bit of an illness going through Linda Rice's barn. So we won't have Arctic Arrogance to finish second here in this race. John, anything jump off the page to you looking at this since, the PPs were only released, 3 hours ago?
Well, I will say this. It looks to me like there's a lot of speed in the race. I think we're going to get a contested pace. It's that 1-turn mile. And I think there's going to be pace. So I think the winner is probably going to be somebody that's sitting a good trip coming off the pace. I'm extremely intrigued by Baffert sending, or the owners sending, Fort Warren to Brittany Russell. I found her to be a very interesting choice, and not somebody that I really, if you would have asked me before it happened, that I would have thought was in the fold or in the mix to get any of his horses. I don't know if she's got horses for Starlight Racing or Maddox Stables. I don't believe she does. She might. That is a ladies syndicate, so maybe they wanted to go with a lady trainer. I don't know. That's just a guess. Brittany has had a lot of success lately. but I find that interesting. And that horse, even though the race that he won was really wire to wire, and the other race he really looked like he didn't run that well, but looks to me like, on the outside he might be one that can sit the right kind of trip. But I'm looking for somebody to come off the pace, and a horse that I find extremely intriguing in there is Paulo Lobo's horse, Transect, who's got 2 starts at Turfway Park, won them both on the synthetic track over there, 6.5 furlongs, now stretches out to a 1-turn mile. He's definitely one. He's a gun runner. He's definitely one that looks like he could sit off all that speed and finish. Gun runner getting a mile off 2 6.5 furlong races is not a concern for me. So he's the one I really have my eye on as possibly the horse to beat in there, or the horse to worry about. I think if he handles the dirt, with all the speed in there, Brad Cox's horse on the outside, what's his name? Iron Clover. He's going 45 to the half with, he might be the speed, but I think somebody's going to go after him. And they got that long run down the backstretch. I think they're going to set it up for somebody coming off the pace. I don't think that Transect has to be that far off it. He did go wire to wire in that second start at, Turfway Park, but the first start certainly showed that he doesn't need the lead to win. Favored both starts. Paulo Lobo is very crafty at spotting his horses. Kind of an under the radar guy, even though he's won some big races and, the Kentucky Oaks, and, has been on the board at the Breeders' Cup. But I'm very intrigued by his horse in here. I really am.
I was really leaning towards the 2 formerly trained horses by Bob Baffert. So I know we've touched on this in another show that, sometimes it's a different routine. They're going to different barns with the Yachtine and Brittany. So that is going to be interesting. But I just think it also goes to the point that you mentioned, John, that Baffert gets good quality horses, and they've had that foundation and all that prep work into them. So here's where I think they're going to come and cut back to a 1-turn mile. And I think Carmel Road and Fort Warren are going to be very solid. And I think they're going to show up. I think this could be a chance, like you said, it might be one of the best horse in young Miss Russell's barn, so we'll see what happens.
And Chad's horse, uncorrelated, is no slouch either. He was 2-1 first time out, caught a sloppy track. It wasn't a fast race, but I don't think it was necessarily a fast track. And he also showed the ability to sit behind horses and rally. If it's fast and he likes a fast track, I mean, he's another arrogant, very, very dangerous in my opinion, even off only the 1 race.
It's interesting that these races we're talking about, some names that come up a lot are Gun Runner, Curlin, Arrogate, and you see these quality horses are, they're making quality horses, I should say.
I think we've got some really good young sires that are really emerging, like like those that we mentioned, and there's even a couple of others. But I think we've really got some nice young sires that are turning out some really nice young horses, which is kind of exciting going forward.
Well, how would you, any final thoughts on that race, Jim?
I was just going to ask John, you mentioned that you like to see horses with a good amount of bottom to them. But, you look at horses in here that, seemingly, perhaps have too much bottom, like General Bankers run 10 times already.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Just run 7 times. It's a little abnormal for, horses coming into, seemingly the final 2 preps leading into the Kentucky Derby. Normally it's, 3, 4, maybe 5 races at this point. Is that a kind of a bet against when you see them with so many races at this point?
I would say, yeah, it's kind of a negative to me. You know, I like to see some bottom in some of these races, but you know, here I am telling you that I like Chad's horse a lot, and he's only got one start. And you know, if you put a gun to my head in the San Felipe, I might take Mandela's horse with one start. So you know, rules are made to be broken. I like to see some bottom in some of these horses. It very rarely surprises me when a horse with some bottom wins, but there is that point that you brought out where, you know, a little too much bottom, where you kind of know, you know what you have, and you know they're kind of a cut below, and they're not really the type that's, you know, going to go forward or peak or, you know, make a big move forward. And definitely a stronger angle for me than bottom is horses that I think are, you know, sitting on a big forward move. So yeah, I would say that when you have that much bottom this early, it can be a negative.
Yeah. A couple of horses that I find interesting here. No surprise. The couple of the Brad Cox horses, Iron Clover. You know, it's interesting to me that you would ship him up to New York. You know, after seemingly a decent race last time out. You know, perhaps he thought that this might be a little bit of a softer landing spot for him. So that move kind of piques my interest a little bit. This Slip Mahoney, I feel like we've just been waiting for this horse to do something. Two Back just got, you know, beat by a neck to Tappet Trice, who, you know, people have talked about in seemingly well regard lately. So perhaps that, and then finally breaking his maiden last time out moves him forward. Those two stick out to me. You know, hopefully Lugan Knight takes a lot of money. I'm not convinced about this horse moving forward. Coming out of that Jerome last time. And then, you know, I want to like General Banker, but you know, I just don't see it there. So yeah, I guess when it comes down to it, I'll probably be playing one or some combination of the two Cox horses, Slip Mahoney or Iron Clover. What you mentioned about the Paulo Lobo horse is interesting too. You know, again, I think more recently he gets remembered for, you know, horses like Ivar that run on the turf. So his dirt stats oftentimes get overlooked, and he's certainly a quality dirt trainer as well. So you know, that's probably could be a decent price on that horse too, given all the various connections that are in here.
No doubt about it. And you know, how can anybody argue against Cox the way he's going with these, you know, Derby preps, and he does for sure have two live ones here. I might have overlooked Slip Mahoney a little bit, more focused on the other one, but yeah, no, you bring out a good point. It's an interesting race. I mean, I would argue that it might be the lightest of the three going forward,
For sure.
but sometimes there's you know, a horse can come out of one of these and surprise you. You know, if the Cox horse runs big, you know what I mean, or Chad's horse runs big, or Paulo Lobo's horse runs big, and they, you know, now they're undefeated, and you know, the next prep they say it's not going to be the Wood, going to be, you know, the Arkansas Derby or the Florida Derby or the Bluegrass. All of a sudden, you got another horse that's right in the mix. So you never know where one of these really good contenders can come out of. You know.
We need somebody to dig back in the archives of the Aqueduct Winter Meet and figure out when the last time there was a race with more than 10 horses in it.
Right. And we got to go back to the archives when the Gotham used to be a major Derby prep on the Derby Trail, which it was. The Bayshore Gotham and the Wood Memorial was the New York path to the Kentucky Derby, and many a horse back in the day ran into Gotham.
Yeah.
It was a major 3-year-old prep. And it somehow lost that status and lost that luster. And this is probably the best shot it has of getting some of it back with this deep field, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many of these horses, hang around town and run back in the wood coming out of this. Because, as a New York guy, I've always appreciated the Wood Memorial, and last year was a good rendition of it. I always like when you can see a handful of quality New York breds run well in there and make it into the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby. So with a big field like this coming up on Saturday, hopefully that's a sign of good things to come for the Wood Memorial in another 4 or 5 weeks from now.
Absolutely. I will be heading to Gulfstream on Saturday. Anybody that's watching wants to say hello. I'll be walking around, hanging around all day. Please say hello. We're getting plenty of signups for our Derby seminar, which is always good. A lot of fun. That's going to be a lot of work, but a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. Going to be a lot of races to dissect. A lot of great stuff coming out on Past the Wire. Couple of good interviews coming up. Done a bunch of good ones in the past. Got a lot going on. So thanks everybody for watching. Enjoy all these races on Saturday. I mean, we've got a day of stakes. I mean, the Gulfstream card is phenomenal all day. The Santa Anita card is phenomenal. The Aqueduct card, I wouldn't say is as strong as those two, but is a great card for Aqueduct in the winter with some big field. Really a full, exciting day of racing across the country this Saturday. Let's hope the weather cooperates, which I think it's scheduled to, and all your bad weather gone out there, Jeff?
For the most part. Hopefully today was the last day of it.
Okay.
They are off the grass on Friday, but we'll see what Saturday brings. But it's supposed to start get nice weather and warm up, and it's always nice when you get these races to come out that like sunshiny day, and then the next day it's all dreary. But you get the nice sunny day on when the big races are running.
How's the weather up there in Saratoga land, Jim?
We got a little bit of snow earlier in the week, and then I think we're supposed to get a little bit more this weekend. So mostly a mild winter so far. I think we've only had 2 storms that brought us more than 6 or 8 inches. So, hasn't been too challenging of a winter for shoveling yet. So
yeah, it's
almost out of the woods.
Been pretty nice here. It was like 80 degrees and nothing but sun every day. So let's hope it's that way Saturday over at Gulfstream. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching.
We all live by great tracks, so I mean you can't beat that, right? We got Gulfstream, John, we got Jim at Saratoga, myself at Santa Anita. So great show, guys. Always good to be with you. And John, I'll let you sign off for us.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Ciao for now, and we'll be back next week.
Nobody does it better.